Well, I haven't made a special study of Spain, but I have looked at trends in local finance around the world. There really aren't any. In contrast, in Spain, there has been a clear increase in the importance of regional and local finance over the last 15 years, as you all know, though mostly at the regional level and not so much at the local level. So yes, subnational or subcentral finance is much more important in Spain than in many other countries, and it has been growing in importance since, well, almost 20 years now. So. Well, I think it's going to have some important consequences. One of the likely consequences, I can't speak of Spain, but this may be true here also. One of the likely consequences is that life is going to be more difficult for local politicians and officials because government finances in general are being restricted, and that almost invariably this means that it will be passed down to the local level of the government. There are, for example, in both Canada and the United States, clear indications that sort of state governments, provincial governments, dealing with their own problems are reducing their transfers to local governments. The central government is also reducing its transfers. There's considerable pressure on budget deficits, even in countries like my own that really have not had serious financial crisis. And in Spain, for example, where some municipalities, not all, but some municipalities had very substantial revenues from land development and the housing boom. The boom is over. The revenues are gone. If some of them had allowed their current expenditures to increase because of these increases in non-recurrent revenues, like land development permits and so on, then they could be in very severe trouble. And they will not be able to get much help from the regional governments or from the state because they also have their own problems. So yes, I think it's going to be a serious problem for local governments, probably for the next 3 to 5 years. Well, I can agree with you that Barcelona is a great city and a great metropolitan area. I know nothing about its finances. I have studied municipal finance, metropolitan finance in many countries, most recently in India, actually, where I've just produced a study of Indian financing of large Indian cities, which are so large they make Spain look small. And with my colleague Ian Slack, I've also done a cross-country study in Latin America and now across the world. There is two general propositions. One, that it's very important that there is an authority, a financial authority that's actually responsible for and deals with the entire metropolitan area. Many countries have substantial problems because their metropolitan areas are fragmented in different local governments, which don't always agree, and they have substantial financial problems as a result. Secondly, it's very important that metropolitan areas have the capacity to a considerable extent to finance their own expenses. Certainly their operating expenses should mainly be financed from their own revenues, and their infrastructure expenditures probably financed in part through borrowing. In Barcelona, for example, one thing I know is that actually the debt in Barcelona is lower than in any other major Spanish city, which is a good thing in a crisis, but it may suggest that perhaps the city has not been borrowing enough for expansion over time. Canadian cities don't borrow either, and one of the problems that they have is that makes them too dependent on private developers to finance expansion. And so it makes them dependent on allowing housing growth, for example, in order to get needed urban infrastructure, and that's a bad idea, because then you can bias the pattern of your city growth. So it may be better if a city like Barcelona in normal times perhaps borrowed a little bit more than it did in the past. But right now, of course, they're in a very good position compared to, say, Madrid, which is in a very bad position from this point of view. So what can you say?